A waitress answered a call in French in front of Undercover owner. Next day he changed her life. The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the white tablecloths of Maison de Marchand, where the clink of fine china and murmur of satisfied diners created the perfect ambience in the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter. Through the elegant chaos moved Camille Durand, a waitress whose graceful efficiency made her nearly invisible to the wealthy patrons she served night after night. "Table 14 needs attention," barked Philippe, the floor manager, his voice carrying just enough volume to make nearby customers glance up from their foie gras. "And fix your hair, Camille. This isn't a diner." Camille touched the loose strand that had escaped her tight bun and tucked it away, her face revealing nothing despite the unnecessary public correction. 3 years at Maison de Marchand had taught her to wear invisibility like armor. "Yes, sir," she replied, the slight French accent she couldn't quite erase making Philippe's lips tighten with displeasure. At table 14 sat a solitary man in his early 60s, studying the menu with the careful consideration of someone who understood fine dining. Nothing about him suggested importance. His suit was expensive but understated, his manner polite but unremarkable. Just another business traveler seeking comfort and familiarity. "Good evening, sir," Camille said, approaching with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Maison de Marchand. May I tell you about our specials this evening?" The man looked up, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes, a flash of recognition quickly suppressed. "Oui, s'il vous plaît," he replied in perfect French, then smoothly switched to English. "But first, perhaps some wine. The Bordeaux, I think." If Camille was surprised by his fluency, she didn't show it. "An excellent choice, Mr. Julien," he offered simply. "Just Julien." What neither Camille nor anyone else in the restaurant knew was that Julien Barrett wasn't merely a patron with a taste for French cuisine. He was the controlling owner of Barrett Marchand Hospitality Group, which included this restaurant and 14 others across North America and Europe. For the past month, he had been visiting his properties incognito, troubled by reports of financial irregularities and internal problems that had reached his New York office. As Camille moved through her service routine, describing specials, recommending wines, anticipating needs before they were expressed, Julien noted details others might miss. The way her shoulders tensed when Philippe approached. The practiced neutrality that settled over her features whenever a customer spoke to her with the particular condescension reserved for service staff. The quiet dignity that seemed at odds with her position. "The coq au vin," he decided, closing the menu. "And perhaps you could tell me how a Frenchwoman finds herself serving in New Orleans? Your accent, Lion, perhaps?" Surprise flickered across Camille's face, quickly replaced by practiced composure. "You have a good ear, sir." "Yes, Lion originally. I came to the States as a teenager." She took his menu, the conversation clearly finished from her perspective. Julien watched her glide away, intrigued by the brief glimpse behind her professional mask. There was a story there, something beyond the typical server biography of paying bills while pursuing other dreams. His meal arrived with impressive timing, each course perfectly executed. Julien observed the restaurant's operations with the experienced eye of someone who had built an empire from the ground up. The kitchen was efficient, the food exceptional, but the staff interactions revealed fault lines invisible to ordinary patrons, particularly in how Philippe wielded his authority. Halfway through his main course, Julien noticed Camille step away from her station, her hand pressed to her apron pocket where her phone had vibrated. She glanced nervously at Philippe, who was occupied with a group of tourists near the entrance, before slipping toward the hallway leading to the kitchens. Julien wouldn't have paid attention except for the sudden change in her demeanor, the professional mask giving way to genuine concern. From his corner table, he could see her through the glass partition between dining room and service corridor. She stood with her back to the wall, speaking rapidly in French, not the carefully pronounced French she had used with him, but native, emotional, urgent. "Oui, Maître Beaumont," she said, her voice carrying just enough for Julien to catch fragments. "Je comprends que la situation est compliquée. Le clause stipule quoi exactement?" Julien's interest sharpened. 20 years in international hospitality had made him fluent in French, and the words, clause, and stipulation, in what seemed to be a legal conversation caught his attention. C'est impossible sans preuve d'affiliation. Her free hand pressed against her forehead, frustration evident in the gesture. Le nom Barrett apparaît au exactement dans le document. At the mention of his own surname, Julian's posture straightened. He watched as Camille's shoulders slumped slightly, then squared again with determination. D'accord. Continue as vos recherches et contactez-moi dès que possible. She ended the call, took a deep breath that seemed to transform her entire being, and became once more the invisible server before returning to the dining room. For the remainder of his meal, Julian observed her with new interest. She handled a difficult table with remarkable grace, soothed a child's tantrum with a simple origami napkin trick, and managed to avoid Philippe's increasingly sharp criticisms with practiced skill. As he signed his check, leaving a tip that exceeded the bill itself, Julian made a decision. He had come to New Orleans to investigate financial discrepancies and operational issues. Now he had stumbled upon something far more personal, a waitress named Camille Durand, who somehow knew the Barrett name, who consulted with French lawyers about bloodline proof, and who carried herself with the quiet dignity that reminded him, suddenly and powerfully, of someone he had once known very well. His old friend and business partner, Émile Marchand. "Will you be dining with us again, sir?" Camille asked as she collected his payment. Julian smiled, a genuine warmth replacing his former reserve. "Oh yes," he replied. "I believe I'll be extending my stay in New Orleans. There's something here that requires my attention." As he left, he felt the weight of the phone in his pocket, the direct line to his executive team, to corporate lawyers, to the vast resources of the company he had built. Resources he would now use to answer a question he never expected to ask. Who was Camille Durand, and what did she have to do with the Barrett Marchand legacy? The Windsor Court Hotel suite felt hollow despite its opulence. Julian Barrett stood at the window, New Orleans glittering below him like fallen stars, but his mind was elsewhere, caught in the past, in memories of Lyon, 1996. Camille Durand, he muttered, the name feeling like a key turning in a forgotten lock. His laptop glowed in the darkened room as he accessed confidential company files, his executive credentials bypassing security that would have stopped anyone else. Employee records from Maison de Marchand appeared on screen, salary history, performance reviews, personal information. Camille's file was unremarkable: 28 years old, French citizenship, American permanent residency, 3 years of service. Excellent customer feedback. Minimal advancement despite qualifications. Born in Lyon, the detail that made Julian's heart race. He opened his personal safe and removed a leather journal he hadn't touched in years. Inside were handwritten notes from the early days of Barrett Marchand hospitality, before digital backups, before corporate structure, when it was just two friends with a vision. Julian flipped to entries from 1996, scanning Émile's elegant handwriting. Lyon, April. Marguerite says she will not come to Paris. Says this life, hotels, constant travel, is not for her. Cannot blame her. 27 years between us. She belongs with her art, her freedom. I belong to this mad dream Julian and I are building. The entry stopped there, then continued weeks later with business matters. No further mention of Marguerite, whoever she had been. Julian's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed Sebastian Reinhardt, Chief Counsel. Sebastian, Julian answered, keeping his voice neutral. Working late? Sir, I received an alert that you've accessed employee files for the New Orleans location. Reinhardt's voice was careful, measured. Given the current evaluation process, I thought I should check if there's anything legal needs to know. Julian smiled thinly. An alert system he hadn't authorized, monitoring his own movements within the company system. Another item for his growing list of concerns. Just standard review, Julian replied. Though I am curious about something that might fall under your purview. The name Émile Marchand, does it appear in any legal claims against the company in the last, say, 5 years? A pause, too long to be natural. I would need to check specific records, Mr. Barrett. Any particular reason for asking? Humor an old man's curiosity, Sebastian. Check and call me back tonight. Julian ended the call before Reinhardt could respond. The hesitation told him everything he needed to know. There was something to find. While waiting, Julian opened his email and found a message from 5 years ago, received shortly after Emil's death. He had never opened the attached document, grief making him delegate most matters to the legal team during that period. The file was simply titled, Personal William. Julian opened it now, scanning the formal language until a paragraph made him stop breathing. In the event that my daughter, Camille Durand, born to Marguerite Durand in Lyon on April 17, 1997, can be located and proven as my biological heir, she shall inherit my personal estate, art collection, Paris apartment, and all shares in Barrett Marchand Hospitality Group currently under my name. Julian stared at the words, memories rearranging themselves like puzzle pieces. Emil's unexplained trips to Lyon over the years. His refusal to sell his modest Paris apartment despite owning grander properties. The wistful expression whenever he saw young families in their hotels. Emil had had a daughter. Not just any daughter, the waitress who had served Julian dinner tonight. His phone rang again. Sebastian, with suspicious speed. Sir, I've checked our records. There was indeed a claim filed by a Camille Durand in 2020, asserting heirship to Emile Marchand's estate. Reinhardt's voice had the practiced neutrality of a man choosing words carefully. And the resolution? Julian pressed. The claim was determined to lack sufficient evidence. The claimant couldn't provide adequate proof of relation, and given the significant assets involved, the board felt it prudent to maintain stringent verification standards. I never heard about this claim, Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. The matter was handled according to standard procedure for inheritance disputes. Reinhardt's voice grew defensive. Mr. Hargrove authorized the approach as a routine legal matter not requiring your direct. David authorized blocking an inheritance claim against my deceased partner without my knowledge? Julian interrupted. Silence stretched between them. Meeting tomorrow 8 a.m., my sweet, Julian finally said. Bring Hargrove and every document related to this claim. Every single document. As he ended the call, Julian looked again at the hotel window, seeing not the city lights but his own reflection, and behind it, the ghost of his oldest friend, whose daughter had been serving meals in their own restaurant while being denied her birthright. I'm sorry, Emile, he whispered to the empty room. But I'm going to fix this. Camille's apartment in the Marigny neighborhood told the story of someone living carefully between two worlds. French poetry books sat beside English literature textbooks. A framed photograph of the Loire Valley shared space with the Tulane University parking permit. Everything was arranged with the precision of someone who had learned to make the most of very little. She kicked off her work shoes and collapsed onto the second-hand sofa, her feet aching from another double shift. The phone call with Maitre Beaumont replayed in her mind, each word carrying the weight of 5 years' worth of hope and disappointment. The lawyer had found something, references to her name in Barrett Marchand corporate documents, but the trail always ended the same way, blocked by legal technicalities, missing paperwork, and demands for proof that seemed impossible to provide. Camille pulled out her mother's old jewelry box, the only valuable thing Marguerite Durand had left behind. Inside, wrapped in faded tissue paper, was a single photograph, a young woman with dark hair holding a baby, standing in front of the Basilique Notre Dame de Fourvière in Lyon. On the back, her mother's careful handwriting. Camille, 6 months. Your father would have loved to see you smile like this. Her mother had told her the story on her deathbed when Camille was 14. A passionate love affair with Emile Marchand, a charming hotelier 27 years her senior. He had been kind, brilliant, and completely devoted to building his business empire. Marguerite had been an artist, 27 years old and fiercely independent, unwilling to be absorbed into his ambitious world. He never knew about you, Marguerite had whispered, her voice weak but certain. I chose not to tell him. He deserved to chase his dreams without the burden of a child he never planned for. But you, ma chérie, you deserve to know where you come from. For 10 years, Camille had been trying to prove her heritage. She had used her savings from restaurant work to hire French lawyers, translate documents, and chase paper trails that seemed designed to lead nowhere. The inheritance, if it existed, remained as elusive as a mirage. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Sarah, a fellow server at another restaurant. "Girls' night tomorrow? You look like you need wine and bad movies." Camille smiled despite her exhaustion. Sarah was one of the few people who knew about her legal struggle, though even she didn't understand the full scope of what Camille was claiming. How could she explain that her father might have been wealthy enough to change everything, when she couldn't even prove he was her father? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Boudreau from downstairs stood in the hallway, holding an envelope. "This was slipped under the wrong door," the elderly woman said, peering curiously at the expensive paper and elegant handwriting. "Addressed to you, dear." Camille thanked her neighbor and closed the door, examining the envelope. No return address, just her name written in flowing script that looked oddly familiar. Inside was a letter that made her hands tremble as she read. "My dearest Camille, if you are reading this, then the lawyers have finally done what I always hoped they would, found you. I write this knowing I may never have the chance to meet you, but wanting you to know that not a day has passed since Lion that I haven't thought about your mother, and wondered about the child she might have given the world. Marguerite was the most remarkable woman I ever knew, brilliant, passionate, and strong enough to choose her own path even when it meant leaving me behind. If you are anything like her, you have grown into someone extraordinary. By the time you read this, you will have learned about your inheritance. Please know that it comes with no obligations, no expectations. Your mother taught me that love cannot be bought or demanded, it can only be offered freely. Consider this my offering to the daughter I never had the privilege to know. There is an apartment in Paris, 17 Rue Saint-Honoré. It was your mother's favorite place in all the world, though she only visited once. I kept it hoping she might return someday. Now it waits for you, if you choose to claim it. Live boldly, ma fille. You carry the best of both your parents. With love and regret for all the years we missed, your father, Émile Marchand. P.S. The key is sewn into the lining of your mother's jewelry box. I suspect she knew this day would come, even if I did not." Camille's vision blurred with tears as she read the letter twice, then 3 times. With shaking hands, she examined her mother's jewelry box more closely and found what she had never noticed before, a small bulge in the silk lining. Inside, carefully hidden, was an ornate brass key and another note in her mother's handwriting. "My darling girl, some doors are meant to be opened when you're ready to walk through them. You will know when that time comes. I love you always. Maman." For the first time in her adult life, Camille allowed herself to believe that everything her mother had told her was real. Her father hadn't just been a romantic story. He had been a real man who had loved her mother and left something behind for the daughter he never knew existed. She looked around her tiny apartment with new eyes. Tomorrow she would face another shift at Maison de Marchand, another day of Philippe's condescension and customers who barely saw her as human. But tonight, for the first time in years, she felt like she was more than just a waitress struggling to make ends meet. She was Camille Durand, daughter of Émile Marchand and Marguerite Durand. And somehow, impossibly, her father had found a way to reach across the years to embrace the child he had never known. The morning meeting in Julian's hotel suite felt like a tribunal. David Hargrove, the company's CFO, sat rigid in his chair, his usual confidence replaced by barely concealed anxiety. Sebastian Reinhardt spread documents across the coffee table with the careful precision of a man handling evidence. "Gentlemen," Julian began, his voice deceptively calm. "I'm going to ask you both a simple question, and I want simple answers. Why was I not informed that Émile Marchand's daughter had filed an inheritance claim?" Hargrove and Reinhardt exchanged glances, a split-second communication that Julian didn't miss. "Sir," Hargrove began, "the legal team determined that the claim lacked merit. Given the potential disruption to company stability, We felt it was best to handle the matter quietly through standard procedures. Disruption, Julian repeated slowly. Tell me about this disruption, David. Reinhardt cleared his throat. Mr. Marchands will specify that any proven heir would inherit his 30% stake in the company. If such a claim proved valid, it would create an unknown variable in our corporate structure. Julian picked up one of the documents, a memo dated 3 years ago. This says you recommended indefinite procedural delays pending extraordinary evidence requirements. What exactly constitutes extraordinary evidence, Sebastian? DNA testing, verified birth certificates, corroborating witness testimony. All of which, Julian interrupted, would be impossible to obtain for a deceased man who never acknowledged paternity during his lifetime. He set down the memo. It seems you've created an impossible standard. How convenient. The silence stretched uncomfortably before Hargrove leaned forward. Julian, you have to understand our position. The European properties alone are worth 200 million. The domestic holdings push that to nearly $500 million. We couldn't simply hand that over based on a story and some documents that could have been forged. So you made the decision for me, Julian said. Both of you decided that I couldn't be trusted with information about my oldest friend's last wishes. That's not... Reinhardt started. Where is Emil's personal letter to his daughter? Julian cut him off. His will specifically mentioned a sealed letter to be delivered regardless of the inheritance status. The two men exchanged another look, this one longer and more desperate. There was some confusion about the delivery requirements, Hargrove said finally. The letter was secured pending resolution of the inheritance matter. Julian stood and walked to the window, his back to them. In the reflection, he could see both men sweating despite the air conditioning. I want that letter delivered today, he said without turning around. And I want the real reason you blocked this claim. Julian. The real reason, David. A long pause, then Hargrove's voice, smaller now. The board was concerned about your emotional attachment to Marchand's memory. We thought, if his daughter proved legitimate, you might make decisions based on sentiment rather than business logic. Julian turned slowly. You thought I would give away company assets out of guilt and nostalgia. We thought you might feel obligated to honor promises Emil made without consulting the board, Reinhardt admitted. The company has grown beyond what you and Marchand originally envisioned. Introducing an unknown heir with significant voting rights could what? Challenge your authority? Threaten your positions? Neither man answered. Julian walked to his safe and removed a thick folder. While you were protecting me from my own emotions, I've been doing some research. Helena Wright and Legal kept copies of everything, including communications between you two about managing my involvement in this matter. He dropped the folder on the table. Did you know that Helena has been with the company for 20 years? She remembers when Emil and I started this business. She also remembers the ethical standards we built it on. Hargrove paled. What are you saying? I'm saying that your employment with Barrett Marchand Hospitality is terminated, effective immediately. Both of you. Julian's voice was ice. Security will escort you out. Your access to all company systems and facilities is revoked. You can't do this, Reinhardt protested. The board works for me, not the other way around, Julian said. And they're about to learn what happens when employees forget that. As security arrived to escort the two men out, Julian made a phone call to Paris. Marie? It's Julian Barrett. I need you to prepare the Marchand apartment on Rue Saint-Honoré. Someone will be arriving soon to claim it. He paused, watching the city through his window. And Marie? When she arrives, treat her like family. Because that's exactly what she is. After ending the call, Julian sat alone with Emil's letter to Camille, the letter that should have been delivered 5 years ago. Tonight, he would personally ensure it reached its destination. Along with a confession he owed to the daughter of his oldest friend, that her inheritance had been stolen, her father's wishes ignored, and her birthright denied by the very company that bore his name. But first, there was one more call to make. Camille? This is Julian, from the restaurant last night. I was wondering if you might have time to meet with me today. There's something about your father that I think you should know." Camille stared at her phone long after Julian's call ended, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. How could a customer from the restaurant possibly know anything about her father? Yet something in his voice, a gravity, a sadness, suggested this wasn't coincidence. They had arranged to meet at Café du Monde, neutral ground where the bustle of tourists would provide cover for whatever conversation was about to unfold. Camille arrived early, clutching her mother's jewelry box and the letter that had mysteriously appeared the night before. When Julian approached her table, she was struck again by the quiet authority he carried, something she had noticed during his dinner but couldn't quite identify. Now, in daylight, she saw grief in his eyes that matched her own. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I know this must seem strange. Strange doesn't begin to cover it," Camille replied, studying his face. "How do you know about my father?" Julian was quiet for a long moment, watching the Mississippi River flow past the cafe. "Because Émile Marchand was my business partner for 38 years. He was also my closest friend." The words hit Camille like a physical blow. "You knew him?" "I knew him better than anyone," Julian said softly. "And last night, when I heard you speaking French about inheritance law and the Barrett name, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. You're his daughter." Camille's hands trembled as she opened the jewelry box and showed him the letter. "This appeared under my door last night. I don't understand how." Julian's face went pale as he recognized Émile's handwriting. "My God!" he whispered. "I gave that to our lawyers 5 years ago when Émile died. They told me it would be delivered when you were found. But I filed my claim in 2020, Camille said, confusion evident in her voice. "My lawyers have been in contact with your company for 3 years." The pieces fell into place for Julian with sickening clarity. "They never told me," he said, his voice heavy with anger and regret. "My own executives blocked your claim and hid it from me. They kept this letter, kept your existence a secret, because they were afraid of what I might do." Camille leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed. "I don't understand." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that I would honor my friend's wishes," Julian replied. "Afraid that I would give you what rightfully belongs to you." He paused, then added quietly, "My name is Julian Barrett. I own the company that bears your father's name." The revelation struck Camille silent. The man who had seemed like just another customer was the co-founder of her father's empire, the person she had been trying to reach through lawyers and legal channels for years. "You're him," she whispered. "The Barrett and Barrett Marchand." Julian nodded. "And you're the daughter Émile never stopped loving, even though he never knew you existed." Tears spilled down Camille's cheeks. "He really was my father? Everything my mother told me was true?" "Every word," Julian confirmed. "He used to talk about your mother sometimes, late at night when we were planning new properties. He said she was the most remarkable woman he'd ever met, and losing her was the greatest regret of his life." Julian reached into his jacket and withdrew an airline ticket. "There's something else. Your father left you an apartment in Paris, the place where he and your mother fell in love. But more than that, he left you his share of everything we built together." Camille stared at the ticket, first class to Paris, departing that evening. "I don't understand," she said. "Why now? Why today?" "Because I fired the people who kept you from your inheritance," Julian replied. "Because I spent all night reading company files and realizing that for 3 years, my own employees have been lying to me. And because tomorrow night there's going to be a gathering in Paris, board members, executives, media, where we're going to formally recognize you as Émile's heir." He leaned forward, his voice gentle but urgent. "Camille, you don't have to be a waitress anymore unless you choose to be. You don't have to struggle to pay lawyers or wonder if your mother's stories were real. You are the daughter of one of Europe's most successful hoteliers, and you own a significant portion of an international empire." Camille looked at the ticket, then at Julian's sincere face, then at her mother's letter in her trembling hands. "What if I'm not ready for this?" she asked. Julian smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Your father built hotels across 3 continents from nothing but vision and determination. Your mother chose to live as an independent artist rather than compromise her values for security. Trust me, you're ready for anything. That evening, as Camille's plane lifted off from New Orleans, she pressed her face to the window and watched the city lights fade below. In her purse was the brass key to her father's apartment, her mother's jewelry box, and a new passport to a life she never imagined possible. Tomorrow, she would discover just how much her world was about to change. The apartment at 17 Rue Saint-Honoré was a love letter written in mahogany and marble. As Camille turned the brass key in the lock, she half expected it not to work, that this entire dream would crumble like so many others had before. Instead, the door opened to reveal a space that took her breath away. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating walls lined with art that seemed to tell a story she was only beginning to understand. There were sketches of Lyons countryside, paintings of New Orleans French Quarter, and in the center of the main room, a portrait that made her knees weak, her mother, young and radiant, painted with the kind of love that transcends time. On an antique desk sat another envelope with her name in Émile's careful script, and beside it, photographs she had never seen. Her parents together in this very room, Marguerite laughing at something Émile had said, her mother, pregnant and glowing, standing on the apartment's small balcony. A note in her mother's handwriting. If she ever finds this place, she'll know how much she was wanted, even if she was never planned. Camille spent the morning discovering her father through his possessions. Books in 3 languages, hotel blueprints annotated with ambitious dreams, and a journal with regular entries about a daughter he hoped to find someday. The final entry, dated just days before his death, read, I know Marguerite was right to keep Camille from this chaotic life I'd built. But God, how I wish I could have known her. Julian thinks I'm foolish for leaving everything to a ghost, but some things matter more than business logic. That evening, a car arrived to take her to Le Palais Marchand, the Barrett Marchand flagship hotel. Camille wore her mother's simple black dress, the same one she had worn to serve tables just days before. Now it felt like armor for a battle she didn't fully understand. The hotel's grand ballroom was filled with people who radiated power and wealth, board members, executives, journalists, and dignitaries. Camille felt their curious stares as she entered, whispers following in her wake. That's her, the waitress who inherited millions, Émile's secret daughter. Julian appeared at her side, elegant in his formal tuxedo, no longer the understated customer from table 14. Ready? He asked gently. Before she could answer, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. Philippe, her former manager from Maison de Marchand, pushed through the crowd, his face red with indignation. This is absurd, he declared loudly enough for the entire room to hear. I've worked with her for 3 years. She's nobody special, just a waitress with an accent who barely deserved her job. The room fell silent. Cameras turned toward Philippe, then to Camille, sensing drama. Julian stepped forward, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to command. Mr. Philippe Dubois, former manager of our New Orleans location, he announced, terminated yesterday for discrimination and harassment. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly the kind of thinking we're changing in this company. Philippe's bravado crumbled as security moved toward him, but the damage was done. Every person in the room now knew that Camille had been working as a server, unknown and unrecognized, in her own father's restaurant. Actually, Camille said, her voice cutting through the murmur of conversations, he's right about one thing. The room turned to her, expectant. I was just a waitress. And you know what I learned from 3 years of serving tables? She walked to the small stage where a microphone waited, her mother's dress suddenly feeling less like armor and more like a reminder of where she came from. I learned that how you treat people when you think they don't matter reveals everything about who you really are. She continued, her accent lending music to her words. I watched customers ignore servers, managers belittle staff, and executives make decisions that affected people they never bothered to see as human. The room was completely silent now. My father built this company on the belief that hospitality means creating spaces where everyone feels valued, Camille said, her voice growing stronger. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that hospitality starts with how we treat each other. She looked directly at the board members, then at the journalists recording every word. I accept my inheritance not because I deserve it more than anyone else, but because I've seen what happens when businesses forget their humanity. Every hotel, every restaurant, every property that bears my father's name should be a place where people are valued, not just the ones who can afford our services, but the ones who provide them. Julien stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, I present Camille Durand Marchand, 30% owner of Barrett Marchand Hospitality Group and, effective immediately, our new Director of Human Values. The applause was thunderous, but Camille barely heard it. She was looking at a photograph Julien had placed on the podium, her parents in this very ballroom 30 years ago, dancing at the hotel's grand opening. Later, as the crowd dispersed and cameras packed up, Camille and Julien stood alone on the ballroom floor. Your father would be so proud, Julien said. Not of the money or the power, but of how you chose to use this moment. Camille smiled, fingering the brass key in her pocket. He always knew this day would come, didn't he? The letter, the apartment, the key hidden in my mother's jewelry box, it was all planned. Julien nodded. Emile believed that some things were meant to be, even if they took decades to unfold. He used to say that the best stories don't have endings, just new beginnings. 6 months later, Camille stood in the newly renovated Maison de Marchand in New Orleans, watching her staff, all of whom now received living wages, health benefits, and advancement opportunities regardless of their accents or backgrounds. Above the entrance, a new plaque read, "In memory of Emile Marchand and Marguerite Durand, who believed that love and justice, like fine wine, improve with time." She was no longer just a waitress, and she was no longer just an heiress. She was exactly what her parents had always hoped she would become, a woman who knew where she came from and wasn't afraid to change where she was going. The brass key to her Paris apartment still lived in her jewelry box, but now it had company, keys to hotels across 3 continents, each one a door to possibilities her parents had dreamed but never lived to see. Some stories, Camille reflected, were worth waiting a lifetime to tell.